Right, a very good evening, everyone, and I do apologize for the tardiness of our start, which is due to technical difficulties, as you probably had imagined. That's how it happens with webinars. On the other hand, if this had been an on-site meeting, we would probably have started 15 minutes late anyway to observe an academic quarter or another type of quarter anyway. Thank you for joining us for this ENPSIT webinar. We're trying to make it into a tradition. It's a very young tradition because we've only been doing this for a year. This will be our third webinar. The whole idea is that we always bring together anyone who has a keen interest in PSIT, Public Service Interpreting and Translation, be they professionals in the PSIT sector, be they public service providers, be they academics, trainers, certifiers, whoever is interested is most welcome. The topic of today's webinar is, we believe, very timely. It is to do with video-mediated interpreting in PSI settings. That is the topic of our choice. If the COVID pandemic has taught us something or anything, then at the very least it is that there are many technical and technological options in order to communicate and interact with one another. And sometimes these can be very convenient, certainly when you need to bridge large distances, for instance, or when you need to communicate with someone across a certain distance at a very short time notice. But on the other hand, there may also be pitfalls in this type of communication. And then the question is, which are these? Can we do something about them? And are we sufficiently aware of them? So that is the topic of today's webinar. Before we start, let me give you advance notice of the fact that, as already indicated in the announcement, this webinar will be recorded so as to make sure that it can get the broadest possible resonance also after this evening session. So if you don't want to be in the recording with your video, you can always turn off your video. We've invited a panel to discuss this topic with us, but of course the floor is not the exclusive territory of the panel. Everyone is most welcome to pitch in and share their ideas with us. All you need to do is hit the appropriate button. I'm sure that you are familiar with all of this in Zoom by now. Feel free also to use the chat function if you prefer using that channel. Now, before we really get going, obviously, it's time to introduce our panel to you. I will first simply run through the different names, and then I will ask each of the panelists to very briefly present themselves. They are the best suitable people to introduce themselves, obviously. We have, and I do apologize beforehand for any mispronunciations. Please do set them straight later on. Gabriel Cabrera Méndez, Leonardo Doria de Souza, Nicolas van Puymbroeck, and Eliza Kalderon. Yes, let me switch screens. You are most welcome, and my heartfelt thanks for you for the fact that you graciously accepted to joining our panel. So as I said, I'd like to ask each of them to very briefly introduce themselves, and we'll start with Gabriel.
So, hello everybody from Spain. My name is Gabriel Cabrera, and I'm the quality manager of Dualia Teletraducciones. That is a company devoted to over-the-phone interpretation in the public services in Spain.
Thank you. And then we move on to Leonardo.
Hello, everybody. My name is Leonardo Doria de Souza. I'm here representing the Norwegian Directorate of Integration and Diversity, which is the national authority for public service interpreting in Norway. I have been working, among other things, with a campaign in order to increase the use of video remote interpreting in Norway for the last 1.5 years. And I think this is, as Lieven said, it's a very timely discussion. I'm looking forward to hear more from you.
Thank you, Leo. And then we have Nicolas.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicolas van Puymbroeck. I work for Fedasil. Fedasil is the Belgian reception agency. We provide housing to asylum seekers during the course of the examination of their application of international protection. And we provide social service, medical service, basic social care during the examination. And in this context, we often take recourse to interpreters to have a good conversation with our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking forward to hearing that perspective as well. And then Eliza.
Yes, good evening and hello, everyone. My name is Eliza Kalderon and I'm a conference interpreter. I have been working for SEVD Austria for the last 4 years. Now I'm the team lead for Spanish and Bulgarian and some other languages. And yeah, thank you very much for the invitation, for being here.
Thank you for joining us. And perhaps to get the discussion started, or to get the panel started, we can start with a fairly broad question, namely, we have a theme which we said was going to be about the challenges and opportunities of VMI in PSI settings. And don't you just love these acronyms? But what are these? What do you think? There are probably many challenges and many opportunities, but perhaps if I could ask each panelist to very briefly tell us about what they believe is the single most important opportunity and the single most important challenge. And perhaps we can start the other way around now and start with Eliza.
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe I would start with some challenges that we have. This is for there is a lack of skilled workers in this area in remote community interpreting, and one of the benefits is the fast and uncomplicated mediation in many areas, and also the diversity of assignments that we have, and also that if you work remotely, you can provide this help to a bright variety of clients and also people that maybe urgently need the help, especially in some small languages that maybe you have an interpreter that is in 500 or 600 kilometers. So you can use this time for the remote interpreting, and the patient in a hospital, for example, can have the service as fast as possible, and this can save lives sometimes.
The first thing you said was that there's a lack of skilled workers. What do you mean by that exactly? Could you
interpreters
elaborate?
Yes, because there are some languages that you cannot study at the university, so there is this is what I mean with lack of interpreters, so that you need people that didn't study interpreting, for example, and had to, they know both languages, but they don't have the interpreting skills. So they need some workshops or other areas they can get the skills they need.
Yeah, which is of course an issue which is much broader than simply VMI, because this is a problem in PSI in general, I suppose. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Nicolas, you have ample experience from the provider's point of view. What do you believe is the single most important opportunity and challenge?
Well, as an opportunity, I identify the geographical reach of interpretation. Some of our reception facilities are in quite remote areas, and in the past, we've had issues finding interpreters that wanted to come to our reception facilities. Of course, we could take recourse to phone interpreting, but especially for longer conversations, this is not, well, most the most suitable way of doing a quality interview with our residents. So having the option of video remote interpretation really gives us the opportunity to have interpreters across the Belgian territory, irrespective of where the centers are actually located. And for a challenge, I would say that the technical and infrastructural facilities, both of our reception centers, but also from the side of the interpreters, are not yet up to date to fully use all the potential of VMI. Our office spaces are not designed to have VMI infrastructure, but we also often notice that our interpreters with whom we work, they work in environments that were not specifically designed to do VMI. So they might be on the road and working with a cell phone, or not being in a silent or environment. So these aspects really make it very difficult for us to conduct quality conversations.
Okay. Good. I think there are a few issues that we will come back to in a minute, I'm sure. Leonardo?
Well, there are lots of opportunities, and especially the geographical aspect that has been already mentioned, especially by Nicolas. In a country like Norway, which is a very long country with immense distances, video remote interpreting is absolutely one very good way on solving the problem of getting hold of qualified interpreters. In the same time, there is a certain skepticism from users of interpreting services. They are very acquainted to the use of telephone remote interpreting, and which actually prefer and feel safer and more comfortable with the use of this mode. So in Norway, around 73% of all interpreting assignments are done through telephone, while we still have a very low percentage of only 5% regarding use of video remote interpreting. Another challenge would be, in my opinion, also a sort of underestimating of the mental and the physical issues regarding use of video remote interpreting. The use of video remote interpreting provides especially interpreters the possibility of having many more assignments during one day, during one work day. But we see also that there is, as I said, how to say, yeah, that they underestimate that the physical and the mental stress that are caused by the use of video remote interpreting as well. And the last thing I would like to say regarding the opportunities, and what we're trying to do in Norway, and what we see that is happening in Europe as well, is that it seems like the field of research regarding video remote interpreting also getting bigger and bigger. So this is very interesting for us in order to develop this field further.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Very interesting points indeed, also about the way in which the profession is changing, with two sides to the coin. More opportunities to do more work, to get more assignments, but there's also some strains attached to that, obviously. Yes, indeed. Gabriel?
Okay, so bear in mind the situation we've got in Spain, that VMI is very poorly used. Okay, it is underused, only maybe in some court settings. Okay, so, and also, okay, I don't want to repeat the opportunities that my colleague said, but I can add that one of the main opportunities that it can provide is trustness, confidence. Since in a moment that you can see the interpreter, and you can read the face of the interpreter, and you also can do the same with the person you are working for. Putting on the table one of the main challenges, or the reason why it cannot enter in the Spanish market, is because it is very time consuming. So we're talking about public service interpreting. We are talking about people that are always in a hurry. Doctors don't have time. When we are on emergency settings, Okay, it is everything a matter of seconds. Okay, couple of minutes, and it takes a long time for the professionals to switch the computer or then switch the video conference, look for the interpreter, and so on. That is why so far it's quite difficult. Maybe we should start working on using that on cell phones or something really quick. But normally what the health providers say is that it is time consuming and they only have some minutes to devote to their clients, to the users.
This is very interesting because there are a few things that come together here, perhaps. For instance, on the one hand, there's Leonardo's remark about the fact that interpreters lack confidence in using video remote interpreting somehow, whereas on the other hand, apparently it invokes confidence in the other parties, the confidence that they invest in the interpreter appears to be great. At least that is what Gabriel says. So this is very interesting, and it's probably something that hasn't really been researched very thoroughly yet, and probably something that should be researched. At the same time, there's also the idea, indeed, of using video equipment is time consuming, and perhaps, as Gabriel said, if you use a smartphone instead, for instance, it's like using telephone interpreting, but then through a video platform or a video-enabled platform, perhaps. Whereas what Nicolas was saying was, well, quality is not always that good because interpreters don't always use the ideal kind of equipment in the ideal setting. So perhaps if I could turn to that. Setting plays a role here. Does setting impact choices in terms of, yes, we are going to use VMI, or we'd rather have an on-site interpreter, or we'll settle for telephone interpreting? And by setting, I mean the type of topic, for instance. Is it a high-stakes topic or not, or a high-stakes interaction? In other words, what hinges upon the outcome of the interaction? Is it simply informative, or are you talking about life and death situations, for instance, or legal issues? Does that impact the choice of the medium that you use? I'm not asking anyone in particular, but Gabriel?
Oh, okay. So I do think so. And more than the settings, maybe it is a matter of schedule. So when mediation is scheduled and we know the exact moment is going to take place, okay, so maybe it is easier to do that or to think about the possibility of VMI. Okay, the main problem that we used to have is this lack of scheduling when they want interpretation right now. Okay, and you can think that, okay, in the court it is it's always over the schedule. You know when you have your trial, but sometimes not. And sometimes the judge calls the interpreter for, okay, I want an interpreter here in 1 hour or right now. So I think that the times in Spain we are able to use a video mediation interpretation or VMI is only when it's on the schedule with time enough to prepare the setting. Otherwise, over the phone.
Okay, Leo, you want to respond to that, and Nicolas as well?
Yeah,
Yes, Leo?
no, I would like to. I agree in a way with Gabriel that making the preparations and scheduling and booking an interpreter in a proper manner, and yeah, it's the organizatoric part of it. It's very important for all kinds of situations. If it would be an on-site interpreting assignment or an online video assignment. But what we have been doing in Norway, we have tried to find at least some aspects that every single interpreter user should consider before booking a video remote interpreting. So we try to not to say that this situation is good or not, but at least we try to give some foods for thought for the interpreter users in order to make them evaluate if the situation, if the setting is suitable for a video remote interpreting assignment. ideally, we would say that a situation where there are more than 3 people, it wouldn't be suitable. For instance, when it comes to childcare services or family visiting, it wouldn't be suitable, for instance, for example, to use a video remote interpreting. But there are some other aspects as well, like the seriousness of a conversation regarding to healthcare issues or police investigation or so forth, that people should consider not to use video remote interpreting. But what we have been trying to do is to provide users of interpreting service with some advices for them to choose themselves which is better or not.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so and as I understand it, this is about the practicalities as well as the content of the interaction. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's the kind of awareness raising that indeed needs to happen quite broadly with all of the interactants. Yes. First Nicolas, and then Eliza.
I understand Gabriel's point, but I think it's not really related. The scheduled nature, it's not really related to the video-mediated interpretation as such. It is related to how interpreters are organized themselves. So you could perfectly well have a hub of interpreters not being behind their desk and responding phone calls, but responding video calls, which would just as easily respond to the immediate response needs of actors that require interpreters. So I think we should disentangle this issue of scheduling from the video-mediated interpretation as such. What we at Fedasil consider as inappropriate settings to have video-mediated interpreters are somehow related to what Leonardo just mentioned, group settings in which it's very difficult for the interpreters to see all faces of the people who are joining the session. But also we have some type of street corner work where our staff are in the field. They have a very mobile setting, and of course they cannot provide an appropriate calm surrounding which would allow for video-mediated interpretation. So whenever it concerns typical conversations in an office space, then I would personally not make a distinction between the type of settings, all settings, or the type of conversations. I mean, I think all conversations would apply for VMI. That's at least how I consider it.
Yes, as long as I think that's the point that you started out with. As long as at the interpreter's end they're prepared for it, basically. Yes. Okay. And what do the interpreters feel about that themselves, Eliza?
Yes, thank you. I would just like to mention an example because I'm also working as an interpreter for SEVD via video, and it is that we wait for the call. So, you know, for example, if you have to work today between 8 and 11, you know there are some calls coming. So you are prepared because you have a list of your clients, and you see also the name, for example, of the hospital. So you see, okay, now I'm going to interpret for a hospital. You see also the language, and you're also prepared for this. Some interpreters has 2 languages, and that's why it's also important. And what the colleagues mentioned about that is not appropriate, if I understood it right, it is not appropriate for having more than 2 or 3 people because maybe you don't see everyone. Most of our clients are taught to have a camera that shows all the people participating in the conversation, and if it's not possible, like for example in a hospital, because they have an iPad, they always show the face of the person that is speaking. So at the beginning, you can always ask as interpreter how many people are taking part in this conversation. They describe all the people and then just show the face of everyone that is speaking. So also the patient can see you, and this has also have something to do with confidence. You know, that when you interpret, you're not just the voice, but there is also a person behind this voice. So you're not just the computer, you're a human being interpreting, and you're also interpreting for human beings. So I think that's important. The setting is important, but also how you present it. And most of our clients are taught about it, and so they know what they have to expect and that what they can expect.
Mm-hmm. And are there also considerations about that have to do with the configuration of those people involved in the interaction? By which I mean, in most of the examples that we've had so far, you have the interpreter in their office or a hub or wherever, somewhere remote, whereas the public service provider and the client seeking the public service are typically in the same room. But there are different ways of going about it, I'm sure. Everyone can be remote, for instance, or it could well be that you have, for instance, the interpreter in the same room as the public service provider, but the client somewhere else, or other configurations. Am I right in assuming that you indeed have this this variety, and does that have an impact on the way in which you prepare for an assignment, or the way in which the interaction unfolds? Do you have any experience in this, Eliza, for instance?
Okay, yeah. Normally, the interpreter is in the own office, and the client and the provider are at the same place. What we can do for preparation, as I told, we have on the list of all the clients, or most of them, and all the topics. So you can prepare, and also you can prepare about the terminology. This is how you do it. I don't know. Did I answer your question, or?
Yeah, sure. One of the questions, of course, would be in traditional public service interpreting, there's always been a lot of discussion about the ideal layout of the setting, the typical triad, for instance. How does that work in this case? Because you need to start by negotiating spaces again to some extent, and the interpreter does not necessarily see everyone. As you said, for instance, sometimes you simply have the iPad and it's directed at one person, and you don't get to see the non-verbal behavior of someone else. How does that work? How does that impact the interaction, if at all?
Yes, I think it impacts the interaction, but I think people are getting used to these kind of interactions. So, for example, when I sometimes don't see anyone, and I need it, I just tell this to the clients, and can you please now put the camera so I can see also the patient? Or if I know that there are only two people, but I hear the voice of a third one, I just ask, like, excuse me, there is the interpreter. I heard a third voice. I just need to know about the situation, about the setting, to can interpret. And mostly people react very positive. They give you this information, so you can interpret. Of course, it's not the same like being in the same room, but there are situations that it's just not possible, and it is better to see the possibility for the people communicating, even under these conditions. Not ideal, but I think even if you are in the same room, the conditions are not ideal. So for me, it's almost the same being behind the camera and in the same room.
Okay, good to hear. Leo?
Yeah, no, I think that what Eliza is saying is very important, and I mean, about the knowledge that interpreters should know about the challenges of using video interpreting tools, but also the knowledge that users of interpreting services should have in order to use this, in order to use the video communication. So again, raising awareness about what you should know about the use of this tool is very important. Not only about how to use an interpreter, but also about the limitations of a video remote interpreting tools.
Nicolas?
I think the issue of location, who was located where during the conversation, has a real impact on turn taking. And whenever the interpreter is absent, isn't in the room, it's always more difficult, I think, for the interpreter to interrupt, for instance, someone who is in the room where the actual conversation is being held, because there is this physical absence. There is no way of you using your own non-formal ways of communication to interrupt someone. You always have to use your voice. You can give a sign, but it will not have the same impact as when you do it in the actual physical setting, I think.
That's basically raising the threshold for an interpreter to really, which is already a threshold in any case, because you're not really an interactant, or at least you're not meant to be. You're just a means to an end, basically, and then you don't always dare to interrupt. That's at least what we're seeing with many interpreters. And yes, it could indeed be an additional threshold. Gabriel?
Sorry,
sorry.
Sorry, Gabriel, just one question to Nicolas. What about you said? Why do you need to interrupt someone as an interpreter? In which situation?
So there might be a situation in which an applicant or a staff member does not stop the conversation so it would be impossible for you, because we do not simultaneous translation, but consecutive. So it would be very difficult if someone never stops to still do the interpretation. And also if something is unclear, if someone has made several points but has used, for instance, a wrong terminology, it might be necessary for the interpreter to stop someone. At least I'm not a professional interpreter, so this is how we deal with interpreters. But it might be necessary for the interpreter to interrupt whenever something is unclear, so he or she is able to do proper translation or interpretation. But perhaps this is not common practice.
No, actually it is not. If I could just answer to this question. No, actually not, because if you are a trained interpreter, you take notes, and you can take notes, for example, 5 or 6 or 7 minutes. It's a little bit long, but actually normally no one speaks more than 5 minutes in a normal situation. So you don't need to interrupt no one. And when you take these notes, you also can mark some place that you say, for example, about something that you didn't understand or have a question. So you ask the question before beginning with interpreting. So I see very little need of interrupting someone. Actually, I never interrupt no one. Or when I begin with interpreting, when there are 2 or 3 or more people, I just at the beginning say, please wait for the interpretation and then the other one, because if 2 people are speaking at the same time, it won't be, for me, it is possible to take notes and also to interpret, but it's more difficult for the listener or for the patient to know who is saying what. And till now, I made a very good experience with this, and people just wait some seconds before beginning the other one with speaking. So there is actually no need to interrupt no one.
I think what you are describing is the ideal situation, but unfortunately, not all interpreters are as trained as you, and not all interpreters take notes in the same way. So I'd rather have an interpreter who is less trained to interrupt me and to say, give me a break, I can translate right now, than having an interpreter who will not necessarily interpret what I've just said, but make a resume, because it takes too long for the interpreter to translate everything literally. So I think that it somehow depends on the quality of the interpreter, and also it depends on the type of training that our staff receive to use interpreters, because our staff are not necessarily trained to take breaks once in a while to allow the interpreter to actually intervene and do the interpretation. So I think it's of course better if someone does not talk for 8 minutes and then you have to interpret. Even if you take notes, it's very difficult, or it becomes difficult when it takes longer.
Yes, and I think an additional element perhaps could be that I'm familiar with the context in Flanders, where you have an ethical code of conduct that also says, for instance, that it's the interpreter's duty to point out to interactants that they are meant to address each other directly and not use the third person, tell him to do this or that, for instance. But if that doesn't happen, the interpreter is meant to interrupt and to notify interactants to do it differently, for instance. So that might also be one of the issues that Nicolas was thinking of. Anyway, Gabriel has been waiting to say something.
No problem at all. Okay, just to bring in a different thing, just to show you how we are doing that in Spain. Since I'm really happy that you are now in your countries discussing about the setting, about the configuration, about the space, okay, where to place everybody. We cannot discuss about that in Spain because we do not do VMI. Okay, so we do a lot of telephone interpreting. That's no problem at all. It's well integrated. It's everyday used. That's not a problem. We are good on that. But when the only client we can have for video conference interpreting is the court. And the first thing we need to work in Spain is not thinking about the configuration, unfortunately. Okay, it is convincing the judge that they can rely on us. Since, just to give you a token, they do not rely that an interpreter can work properly from his or her house, or not even in a separate room. Normally, the interpreter is always in the court, okay, together with the judge. And maybe when we are doing video conference interpreting is because one of the counterparts maybe is in jail or is in another court, but the interpreter is always close to one of the judges. Okay. In fact, I think the last time I did a video conference interpreting in a court, myself as a professional interpreter, I was alone with the judge. Both of the counterparts were was in Portugal, another one in the south of Spain, and I was in Madrid only with the judge. It's like they rely and they trust all the professionals, but interpreters. That is my feeling. And that is the situation we have here. So I'm afraid here in Spain, we need to work, we need to dig a little bit, okay, and to work hard on that. Okay, we can do our job. Okay, we are professionals, something that you don't understand. Okay, and then okay, we'll maybe contact both of you, okay, to ask about the situations and the settings and the configuration. But we have a hard work in Spain since this VMI only happens in private hospitals. Okay, talking about public services, it is a ghost. It's something you do not see.
And this is quite interesting because at court, for instance, the setting that you're describing, yes, it might inspire confidence in the interpreter among judges, but what does it do in terms of neutrality or the perception of neutrality as far as the interpreter goes for the other parties? Because if you're in the room with the judge, for instance, what do defendants and claimants, for instance, who are at the other end, how do they perceive this? Or is that not an issue?
My answer is I don't know. Since I think they don't care. I mean, because it is like, okay, interpreter, you can speak. Or, okay, it's okay, I'm exaggerating, all right? But you can have the feeling that all the professionals can be remote. You cannot. And if a judge allows that, there are some of them that can allow this, it is because someone did a very good job in convincing them, in showing them how is our job. Okay, but we are living in a moment that everything is in a rush. Everybody is in a hurry, and they don't want to be trained. And it's like I want interpreter here, otherwise I do that without interpreter. Yeah, it's problematic times, I'm afraid.
Could I just ask you, because as you've stressed, Spain is very good at telephone interpreting, and that is absolutely true. Spain is well known for its telephone interpreting services, but you personally, would you like to see more VMI and see VMI replace telephone interpreting in many instances, or not particularly?
Oh, my answer is yes. And we are doing some telephone interpreting in settings where we shouldn't do it.
Such as?
For instance, mental health. Okay, it is true that maybe patient wouldn't like to be seen. That can be a possibility, but for sure others would like to see the interpreter, and interpreters would like to see the patients. But the problem is that they are not implementing that service. Or also, we are covering suicide service with over-the-phone interpreting, and you can think that's horrible, that's really dangerous. Yes, but that's the situation. I mean, because when, for instance, in the case of the Department Against Suicide, when someone calls and says, I'm thinking about committing suicide, the last thing they want is to switch a camera on. It is like, okay, I just dial the number, I contact an interpreter enters in the line, and we start working. Okay, and when I said before, if I have a mental health scheduled meeting, that would be great to do that on a video conference setting. Okay, so we can all see each other, or we can switch off one of the cameras. That's not a problem. Okay, because it is the moment when you need, for doing a good job as an interpreter, you need the person to trust you. Okay, and many times you don't get it over the phone. So yeah, so I would like to see more VMI, and that should be against my job. Okay, but I would really like it.
Okay, thank you. Very clear answer. Eliza, you wanted to intervene earlier? I thought I saw your hand.
Yes, that button. Sorry. Lot of buttons here. Yes, the first thing, it was about, I think, Gabriel or Nicolas said it, about the third person, that this is the moment that you would have to interrupt someone. Just maybe if you allow me something of my experience by working for SAVD, because there are a lot of people that actually speak in the third person, tell him, ask him, and you know what I mean. At the beginning, before I begin to interpret, I just take a few seconds to explain the clients in both languages that I am going to interpret in the first person. And I also give some examples. Like I said, you don't need to say tell him or say him, just speak with the other people as I weren't there. So, and normally they do it, and if they don't do it, I do interpret in the first person. So after the third or fourth or fifth sentence, they notice, oh, okay, and they start speaking in the first person. It doesn't function with anyone and always, but I think if we get used people to this, just step by step, it is possible. And
Okay.
what Gabriel said, I would also like, because we do video and also telephone interpreting, and I really prefer video interpreting. Yeah, because it's easier, and the impact by telephone interpreting is more for the interpreter, because you don't see the people. Sometimes I just ask, please, can you describe me the setting? How many people are in the room? Where do you sit, or what do you do? Just for me to imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Gabriel.
But do not forget, okay, that on many occasions nobody sees nobody. Okay, when we are in the emergencies, you can only do telephone interpreting. If someone has an accident on the road and calls, here in Spain is 112, I think it's the rest of Europe, so it calls 112, nobody sees nobody. That is the field of telephone interpreting. Telephone interpreting is for a moment, exactly a moment to know what happens, okay, and to communicate and send the ambulance. That's all, okay. Then obviously, when the person goes to the hospital, that will be better to use the VMI. Okay, but do not forget that when we do telephone interpreting, the problem is never we don't see. because you never had the possibility to see. Our environment is a blind environment. We have other skills, okay, to transmit with our voice or to get what is happening there, okay, but sometimes it's simply impossible. Okay, I just wanted to stress that. Thank you.
Okay. Perhaps one other thing that I wanted to bring up is a potential opportunity that, at least theoretically, seems available, is that with VMI, it might be easier to do some kind of relay interpreting. For instance, if you need, on very short notice, someone who's got a very good command of a certain language of lesser diffusion, very hard to come by in your area, but you know someone who might be available but doesn't speak the required other language, then you could go through, for instance, some kind of lingua franca through relay interpreting. I hope I'm making the setting somewhat clear. So basically involving two interpreters, and the two listen to each other and use each other's performance, basically, and interpretation in order to make their own. Is this something that you know has already materialized? And if so, does it happen often? Is it desirable? I'm looking around the entire table, but there's silence, which could be meaningful. Nicolas?
Personally, I've only used it for relay interpreting in terms of sign language context, because then, of course, having a phone as intermediary would not really be helpful. So, but I think in general, if we notice that VMI is not really used or not as frequently used as we might expect in other countries, then to expect relay interpreting is a bit far-fetched, I think. So I would see it as an opportunity, but as a theoretical opportunity. And I think especially sign language users have been using it in this way, but then it's only restricted to this niche within the interpretation context, I think.
Mm-hmm. You call it a theoretical opportunity. Well, perhaps I could be more optimistic by offering the formulation a future opportunity. You never know if the idea is indeed that there's simply a lack of available or a lack of availability in terms of VMI interpreters across Europe or wherever, then indeed there is a practical issue, but in itself it could be worthwhile. Yeah, Nicolas?
Yeah, I agree with you. But then again, if VMI allows you to be in contact with an interpreter who is very remote from you, then why use a remote relay interpreter? You will always find the exact combination that you're looking for, I think, if you would have a global scale to search for. So I think, in a sense, the geographical capacity of VMI allows you not to use relay interpreting, except for instance, the sign language. But even there is no need if there would be a global pond to fish in.
Perhaps that's also a theoretical opportunity or a future opportunity. Yes, good. One of the things that I think it was Eliza mentioned at the very start was about skills of interpreters. It's not always easy to find skilled interpreters, certainly not when it comes to languages of lesser diffusion, for which formal training is often quite scarce, if present at all. But in general, are interpreters sufficiently trained or otherwise experienced in dealing with both the technicalities of video interpreting, as well as with the specificities of doing this kind of interaction, and what to watch out for, and what the differences are with face-to-face interaction as an interpreter? And is there anything more that could be done? Could we offer materials, for instance? Leo?
Thank you, Lieven. I think you will find the whole scope of interpreters, both for people with experience in using video tools and with long experience in the field of interpreting, and the other way round as well. But we have seen in the work that we have been doing for the last year that there is indeed need for more knowledge and more training on the using video remote interpreting, both for interpreters but also for users of interpreting services. In Norway, we have 2 educational institutions providing university level training on the video remote interpreting. Actually, it's 15 ECTS university level training. And we, at our directorate, we have just launched a new learning program, which goes along 70 till 80 minutes on how to deal with video remote interpreting. And this is something that is free of charge. And this is as a response for the need that we have mapped from both interpreters and users of interpreting services. But of course, as I mentioned, there are people also that are very well trained and comfortable with the use of this kind of tools.
Mm-hmm. But you have made materials available and free of charge, so that's very good. Only in Norwegian?
Yes, only Norwegian. I'm sorry. We have some videos which are actually subtitled in English. Some of them you already got on the ENPSIT website, and the new ones I'm going to upload as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. It's something, at least, because I'm sure that much of this kind of information that you're conveying is quite universal.
Yeah, that's correct.
Will be similar regardless of the region where you're working. Okay, thank you, Eliza.
Yeah, this is something that we have set. No, please, Eliza. Yeah.
Eliza.
Okay, yes, thank you. I would like to mention 2 aspects about this. The first one is that all the interpreters that start working with SAVD receive training before they start working. So there is some 1 hour or more. It depends on the interpreter. It depends if it's a skilled trained conference interpreter or someone that maybe had some workshop. So we train the people to work with the system, explain, for example, how the software works. There is a specific software that we use, and what is important, for example, having a headset for people to can hear you well, and about the internet connection. These are some technical issues, but they are very important at the time when you interpret. And this is the one aspect that all the people or interpreters that start working with SAVD receive this training before the first assignment. And there are also 2 teaching cooperations with universities for students to get used to VMI. This is the one is of the Institute for Theoretical and Applied Translation Studies in Graz, and the other one is with the Faculty for Translation Studies of Germersheim. It is part of the teaching plan of this institute. And this is for students to get used to VMI.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. Do you think there's perhaps kind of an emerging knowledge gap or skills gap between, on the one hand, recently graduated interpreters or recently trained interpreters, as well as those interpreters that are affiliated to an agency that works first and foremost through VMI settings, and on the other hand, those that don't always work with that kind of an agency, so don't have the opportunity for in-house training and don't have any recent training experience, etc. Do you think that's some kind of skills gap in the labor market?
No, I wouldn't say this after the 2 years of pandemic. I think before the pandemic it was different, but now most of the interpreters got used to working with VMI. So this is my personal opinion. I don't see this gap.
Okay. Now we're talking about the professional anyway. Does VMI in any way change the life and the work of a PSI interpreter in terms of work schedule, in terms of physical, your ergonomy, for instance, the fact that you're doing screen work basically rather than anything else? Does that have an impact on people's lives? Mental well-being, social contact?
Can I answer this?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, I think yes, it has a very big impact on mental health because as I say, I'm working as well for SEVD, but also as a conference interpreter, as a freelance. So I know both aspects. And at the end of a long day of work, it is you are more tired than after as a normal conference day, or being, for example, at a hospital for 2 or 3 or even 5 hours. But when you're working with people in presence, the interaction is different. And of course, after that, you are also tired. But I think that after being 5 hours just on a screen, you get more tired and you need more pauses, more breaks. You don't have the social context. Of course, you can write with people and be on the phone, but I think it's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, Gabriel.
Oh, something new that this new configuration brought to our lives is that, from my point of view, is that now interpreters, we need to invest in equipment. So if you want to offer your services as a VMI interpreter, for the first time, you need good internet connection. You need to buy the cable. You need to buy your headset. Bearing in mind that you use an USB because it's better than a mini jack. Bearing in mind the kind of mics you want to buy. Okay, do not buy a consolidation one. It works horrible. And you need maybe to buy a cam, a good one. Okay, and if you live, as it is my case, in the rural environment, okay, not in the capital of the country, you can lose the electricity connection or the internet connection. So you need to have an energy box at home, okay, where to plug things. So for the first time in history, that's the point I want to break here now to debate, is the interpreters, we need to invest. Before, only translators had to buy CAT tools, okay, to pay for CAT tools and to pay for things. No interpreters. We just came to the booths, okay. Headsets were there, okay, and you just need to manage to get there. But now you need to invest in good equipment, and if you don't, you are out from the market because you cannot give a bad service.
Mm-hmm.
That's something new.
And at the other end of the balance, literally, is there any strain on tariffs? Because in many sectors, whatever is done online is worth less because it's quick, it's easy, less effort. You don't have as much time investment and so on and so forth. So does it put tariffs under pressure as well?
If I give my opinion that I give the opportunity to my colleagues, I think it's a matter of education once again. Okay, so the thing is that we shouldn't accept this because, in fact, what we need to tell the clients is that the job is the same. Okay, if I'm a video conference interpreter doing simultaneous interpreting, okay, I'm at home. That's great. I can be at home, but I'm going to spend nights studying the same way as before. Okay, so I'm going to do my best. I'm going to devote my time. I'm going to make glossaries and so on and so on, and I'm going to pay for my own education. Okay, so something that should be good. At least in Spain, we are doing that. during the pandemic and after the pandemics, we met together on a video conference, and we said, okay, let's be clear on that. Do not accept this argument, okay, as you're working from home, it's a bit cheaper, okay, because we need to tell the clients how the situation is. But it is true, clients always want to find a hole, okay, a way to reduce their costs, okay, and it's our matter, okay, to stay there and do not accept it since it is unfair.
Mm-hmm. Of course, there could be some kind of market disturbance if you have, for instance, agencies, which has been known to happen, agencies that employ on a freelance basis some people that are willing to work for cheap tariffs, for instance, and then or for lower tariffs at least, and that disturbs the market as well, because you as a freelance interpreter on your own or as a small group can indeed stand tall, but if you're priced out of the market by someone else, then by larger agencies, that disturbs things.
And you don't need just another colleague to reduce the price to destroy the market. The client simply can hire an interpreter in another country.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really difficult to fight. In the case of the Spanish language speakers, okay, our colleagues from Latin America, all right? So they used to charge less.
Mm-hmm.
So this is happening now. Yeah, that is another complication that the pandemic's brought.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I saw some hands raised. First, Nicolas.
Yeah, I was going to make the same argument that the market becomes much more broader because there is the possibility to do remote interpretation from everywhere. So it's much harder to control tariffs. I don't think the end users assume that because it's virtual that it's less expensive, but just the fact that there is more competition because the market is a global market, I think that really is a potential to play on the tariffs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Eliza?
About the tariffs, I think we had the same problem also before VMI and before the pandemic. On the market, on the free market, there will always be someone that is less cheaper than you. So I think it's nothing that it's directly connected with VMI and the pandemic. Of course, now you have a broader market, but I think that it's the same problem like 2 or 3 or 5 years ago. This is the one. And we had also that experience at SEVD that there was a client that actually had a contract, then they switched to another provider that was cheaper, and then they came back because they take people that are not skilled, and you see it in the market. And after 2 or 3 or 5 assignments, you see the difference. So there is also something positive about this, that people see the difference in the quality.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Now, we've been going on for slightly over an hour, I think. Apologies that we're running out. We had scheduled to go on until 8, but I thought let's make sure that we've got at least 60 minutes, that you've got your money's worth in this respect. But perhaps to round off, could I put a question to the panel, but also to anyone, because everyone who's online has been so extremely quiet, listening very attentively, I'm sure. But as I said, you are most welcome to pitch in. But perhaps the general question could be looking into the future. What does the future hold for VMI in public service interpreting? Is it going to replace face-to-face interpreting? Is it going to become even more complicated or much simpler? Or is it ever going to happen in Spain, for instance? And if so, when? Can you look into the future? Or what would you look forward to? What would you like to see as an evolution in VMI? Perhaps this is the most difficult question I've asked so far.
I'm going to ask Santa to bring VMI to Spain. Okay, so I hope he reads my letter. But also talking about the letters and papers and documents, I think that a VMI will erupt in our lives when it is really worthy. And for instance, one big opportunity it has is the possibility to share documents. So if I'm working in a court or in a hospital, and there is a way where I can read the document the person is bringing, or I can receive maybe a video, it's like, yeah, I can give this added value. Okay, not just someone talking in another language. Okay, so that seems to be not something something you will pay for. Okay, but if it offers many other possibilities like sharing things, and so you can enhance, you can add value, it will enter. So I think VMI needs to offer more things than what it's offering now. And I hope Santa reads my letter, okay, and brings VMI sooner than later.
Okay. Eliza?
Yes, thank you. I think that VMI is not going to replace interpreting in presence, but I think it's that the important thing is the mix. You need a good mix of both settings, because both settings have something positive and something negative for everyone that's participating. This is what I think, and I have only one wish and about the future, that people and clients and providers use more headsets. This will be really very helpful for us, for interpreters,
Yes.
if they start using appropriate headset.
Absolutely, yes. Giovanni Bevilacqua also agrees with you. He noted in the chat that both systems will coexist depending on the situation, the setting, and the money as well. And indeed, it is, as you said, educating the parties involved is important. It's always been like that, right? We've always had to try and find ways of educating them about the specificities of interpreting settings. And now that most of them have gotten used to that, we also need to start educating them about what it means to do that online. Nicolas, did I see your hand? Yes.
Yeah, I fully agree with Eliza that it's important to have the mix, but at the same time, each of the options, well, I think VMI needs to be more frequently used than it is used right now. So I think there is still a battle to be fought for VMI to be more popular than it is currently. And I think this is going to downplay the importance of telephone interpreting, which at least for my area of expertise, the kind of emergencies in which we really need a phone interpreter are not so often. So I think VMI should really replace, to a large extent, telephone interpreting.
Okay. In any case, also in Spain, if only for 5%, then we will have made inroads. Okay, might I suggest that we end our webinar here with a grand virtual round of applause to our panelists, whom I would like to thank very much for this discussion. Very interesting insights from many different perspectives. That is what we were looking for, what we were aiming for, and I believe that this is also what we received tonight. So thank you very much, Nicolas, Gabriel, Eliza, Leo, for being with us, for sharing your insights. We will make the recording available through the ENPSIT website, and we'll also advertise this, obviously. And we look forward to seeing everyone again at whatever occasion, be it a webinar, be it one of our conferences like the InDialogue conference in September in Ghent, for instance, or any other occasion. Thank you very much for being with us tonight, and enjoy the rest of the night. Perhaps being a great supporter for your country at Eurovision tonight, who knows? Enjoy. Bye-bye.